All right, so this is being recorded, and basically what I wanted to do was go over APA formatting. I know that a lot of students have struggled with this, and when you're first starting into your graduate program, it's sometimes the APA requirements can be just a little bit overwhelming, and it's not something that a lot of students use before they get into graduate school. So I wanted to go through just some of the sources or resources that CSU Global offers in terms of APA assistance. So hopefully you can see my screen that I'm sharing, which should say library at the top. If you can't see that, let me know. But this is available to students, and it's just the library. It's a library guide, and this one just happens to be about APA style. And so I wanted to go through a few of the things that are maybe just a little bit more common mistakes that students make. And then if you have any questions, you can always jump in and ask them as I'm going as well. So the first thing that I want to kind of go over is the fact that they follow the 6th edition. So if you see like right here where I'm highlighting, the publication manual of the American Psychological Association 6th edition, I recommend that students actually purchase the APA manual. It's a blue, it's like a blue book with green writing. You can get it off of Amazon, and it's kind of nice to have, and just in case you are unsure. But this site is also extremely good because they give you examples. So over here, one of the things that I've seen students do is that they'll copy and paste the citation from EBSCOhost or from ProQuest, and then they'll assume that it's APA formatted because EBSCOhost and ProQuest both say that it's APA formatted. However, the vast majority of those sources are actually not in the correct format when you choose the Cite button out of those databases. And students will sometimes ask, well, if you guys know they're not correct, why don't you fix them? But the issue is that Colorado State University does not own those databases. They use them, they pay to use them. So we don't have the right to be able to go in and make any changes. So what we request that you do is that you use those tools to generate a starting point. So take that, cite it, use the cite feature, copy and paste that information into your reference listing, but then go back and format them appropriately. Just copy the information over so that you've got all of the required information, and then go back and work on the formatting. So talking about documenting your sources, obviously we want to help you avoid plagiarizing, and most students do not intend to plagiarize ever. If you have a note from me in your paper that says if you're not citing the source here where you need to be, it's technically plagiarism, I am not saying that you're intentionally plagiarizing. What I'm saying is technically that's what that's considered, so try not to do that. So a lot of students will say, I don't plagiarize. It's not something that I mean to do. I know that. So if I see it, usually what I do is just point it out and then let you know not to do it anymore. It also allows the reader to find your sources. So basically, I need to be able to know what your information is and what the information from the sources are. So, you know, if you have a whole paragraph and you're not citing the sources, I don't know what part of that paragraph is yours versus what part of that paragraph is somebody else's thoughts. So it's very important for you to give credit where credit is due in that respect. Also, it provides evidence for your argument and adds credibility to your work. This is a very big deal. Very few times in your graduate program are you going to be able to write an opinion paper. That is not what graduate school is about. Graduate school is about research-based critical thinking. And so you can make a statement and you can have an opinion, but it better be supported with some kind of evidence that adds credibility to that opinion. So you can't just say, in my opinion, this is the case, because that's not graduate level. If you say, you know, this is the case and here's some evidence to support it, that's what we want to see. So you need to make sure that you're using citations throughout, okay? Now, let's look at in-text citations, okay? When you're actually writing your paper, you need to use in-text citations. If you're not citing in the text, you cannot list that source in the reference listing. If you have a source that's listed in your reference listing that's not cited somewhere in the text, there's a problem. Either you used it and didn't cite it, or you didn't use it but in the reference list claim that you did. Either way is not okay. So you need to make sure that your in-text citations and your reference listing always 100% match, okay? So citing in the text, you can do it a few different ways, and most of the time students will use multiple ways just based on the sentence structure. So talking about those different ways here, first of all, you will notice in every one of these examples, they're using past tense. When you use the research, when you cite sources, you have to use past tense. This research, oops, can you guys maybe mute your mic unless you have a question, and then if you have a question, unmute it and ask so that it doesn't give like background noise. So all of the research has already been conducted. If you're looking at something and you have a source, it already happened. The research already was conducted. So you use past tense. So you don't want to say Jones states. No, he already did that in 2009. He stated it. So if you just have one author and you want to include the author's name as part of the sentence, by the way, that's a really pretty yellow lab. You want to include their name as part of the sentence, that's fine, but you need to then put the year in parentheses right after the name. So Jones, parentheses, 2009 stated, okay? You don't want to say Jones stated that all ants crawl and then put 2009 at the end. Put that number, put that year right after the author's last name if you're going to use the author's name as part of the sentence. If you want to just say all ants crawl and not put Jones in the sentence itself, you can do that, but then you just have to say all ants crawl and then in parentheses Jones, comma, 2009, so that somebody that's reading it knows that that statement comes from Jones. So if you have two authors, it's kind of the same thing, Jones and Thomas, 2009. Okay? If you have multiple authors, the first time you use them, you have to list them all out. Jones, Thomas, and Dixon stated. After that, you can just say Jones et al. Stated. Okay? So you can use the ETAL after the first time. Okay? Now, the next thing that I want you to look at or want you to think about is when you're using the same author multiple times in a paragraph. Okay? If you've got the same author multiple times in a paragraph, you can actually just use the last name after the first time. So for example, if we say Jones 2009 stated that all ants crawl, and then we say Jones also stated that all butterflies fly, You do not have to put the 2009 the second time in that paragraph. But if you start a new paragraph, you have to put the year again the first time. So let me explain that again. If you use Jones more than one time in a paragraph, the first time you use Jones, you need to use the year. After that, you do not need to use the year. But when you go to a new paragraph, you have to use the year again the first time you use it. It is fine if you always want to use the year. If that confuses you and you're just not quite sure, you can always use the year. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't want to, you don't have to after the first time you use it in the paragraph. Okay? Okay, so you can also do it a couple different ways. We looked at this one over here on the right, well, similar to this, where we said Smith 2009 suggested blah, blah, blah. You can also put the year right in the sentence. So in 2009, Smith suggested this. Or you could also say one researcher suggested adults learn best when, and then cite the whole thing inside the parentheses with the last name and the year. So there's several ways that you can do it. Whatever you like the best is fine. And whatever really fits within the context of the sentence is good with me. You may want to mix it up a little bit just so that it doesn't look redundant, but it is important that you are citing appropriately. Now, those are paraphrases, and I will tell you that we would love to see paraphrasing 99.9% of the time in your papers. The reason we like to see paraphrasing is because then you're required to read the source, interpret what they're saying, and put it into your own words. That's a critical thinking skill that we like to see. If you're just quoting somebody, you're just taking their words, pasting them into the document, that does not require any critical thinking on your behalf. All that is you stating verbatim what somebody else said. So at the graduate level, what we really like to see is that you can analyze, synthesize, and evaluate the research that you're reading. Okay? So most of the time you should be paraphrasing. I tell students as a rule of thumb, there's only a couple times when you should quote. If it's going to lose something in translation, for example, let's say you're talking about a company's mission statement. You're not going to paraphrase a company's mission statement. You're just going to quote it because it is what it is. If you have a famous speech that you are going to quote, you're not going to paraphrase Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. You're going to quote it because it loses something if you try to translate it. Definitions. If you have a specific definition that you're trying to give for a term, you're probably going to quote the definition from the source. So those are times when you might use quotes, but otherwise, if it's not going to lose anything in the translation, you should be interpreting it and putting it into your own words by summarizing and paraphrasing. But let's look at some of these quotes, okay? If you have a quote with 39 or fewer words, you put it right into the text. So it looks just like the rest of the paragraph. It's just another sentence in the paragraph. If you have 39 or fewer words in the quote, anything over 39 words, so 40 words or more, you are required to use a block quotation. There are very, very few times you should ever need to use that in your entire graduate program. Because again, we really focus on trying to get you to use paraphrasing. So one of the other things that I really want to point out just quickly, and this is for everything, paraphrasing, quoting, doesn't matter. Right here. If you're going to use these, it's here and here. I don't know if I can highlight both of them at the same time, but anyway, if it's inside the parentheses, you use an ampersand. If it's in the text, you use the word and. Do you see the difference there? Ampersand, if it's in the parentheses, if you have multiple authors. If you're citing multiple authors in the actual sentence itself, it's the word and. So that's something that a lot of people miss just because it kind of all looks the same. So just keep that in mind. Inside parentheses, you never use the word and. You always use an ampersand. And in text, you don't use an ampersand, you always write out the word. So if you're writing something in your paper and you use an ampersand, it's wrong unless it's inside of a citation. So if you have a quote, the biggest difference is you have to include a page number where that quote can be found within that source. So All Ants Crawl is a quote, and it's from the Jones 2009 reference on page 45. Okay. If you want to keep Jones as part of the sentence, here you can see it says, according to Jones 2009, All Ants Crawl, page 45. So the page number comes after the quote. Even though the year comes after the author, the page number comes after the quote. Okay? Also notice the period is after the closed parenthesis. So in this situation right here, we just said All Ants Crawl, and then we put Jones and Thomas, comma, 2009, comma, page 64, all in the citation. Okay? So you can go out here and look at these so that you can go out, you can find one that matches what you're writing, and you can kind of see an example of what it is that you want to, how you want to format it or how you need to format it to make sure that it's APA. So then here we have these long block quotes. I really, really recommend you do not use block quotes. If you have a quote that's over 39 words, you need to paraphrase it. There's really very few reasons why you wouldn't. Okay? Now, right here, every single resource in the text of your paper must be listed in the reference listing. And every resource in the reference listing must be cited in the text as well, okay? The only exceptions are things like an interview or classic works like the Bible, which I'm not sure you're ever going to need to cite in any papers for your graduate program. So, but make sure that in your reference listing, they are all listed alphabetically by last name, okay? That reference listing has to be alphabetical. So, any questions so far? If you have questions so far, unmute and go ahead and ask. At any time, if you have questions, just unmute your mic and go ahead and ask me the questions so I can answer them right there while you have them, and then you don't forget. I'm now going to go to this reference listing option here, and we're going to talk about acceptable sources. And you're going to see from me, probably more than you'd like to, me saying you're not using scholarly sources. And I have students that'll say, it's a book. You assigned it as reading for the course. It's a book. How's it not a scholarly source? Well, it's not, because it's not peer reviewed. So let's talk about types of sources to cite. So you're going to look at a bunch of different materials. And this is not to say that you can never use a source that's not academic, okay? But there is a difference between magazines, newspapers, and informational websites and peer-reviewed research articles. Okay? The New York Times, Forbes magazine, the Business Week, all of those are probably listed in EBSCOhost and in ProQuest, and they have articles out there. Those are not academic sources. Those are popular literature. So, popular literature may be biased depending on the authors. For example, if I were to tell you that I wanted you to go out to Fox News site and give me information, is it going to be biased or unbiased? Fox News is one of the most Republican news sites there is. So if you're looking for unbiased, it wouldn't be there. So you need to make sure that you're looking at sources that are completely unbiased and objective. So things like blogs, which are complete opinions, editorials, complete opinions, those things are not what we're looking for in terms of trying to find support for something you're saying. If you're saying that I believe this is true because somebody wrote it on a blog, that is not a good foundation for your belief. So you need to actually look at sources. And honestly, when I was going through my master's and my doctorate program, it really taught me to start questioning literally every source I could find. So if I was out now even looking at a website and I'm looking at election polls, they're so I mean, it's really hard to find an objective election poll because every source is biased one way or another. So you really want to start excuse me. You really want to start paying attention to where the information's coming from and questioning that source. So in order to be used as a good source of information, we like to see that it is scholarly or academic literature. And right here is why. If it comes from a peer-reviewed journal, like the Journal of Business Ethics or the Academy of Management Journal or any of those journals, okay, here's the process that it goes through in order to get something published. So the last time I published something, I conducted some research with a couple of colleagues. We wrote up the research, we wrote up the paper, we submitted it for publication to a journal. When we submitted it to publication, they handed it out to 5 scholar practitioners in that field that were experts in that field to review our work. They reviewed our writing, they reviewed our critical thinking, they reviewed our research methods, they reviewed our research findings, they reviewed everything about it to make sure that it was actually good, solid, objective, well thought out research. So for example, right here, if we came up with a bunch of results but our research methods were incorrect, they would not publish it. If we had somehow biased our research methods, they wouldn't publish it, they'd send it back. So they look at all of these different aspects to make sure that we have good, sound information. So every article that you see in the library that's from a peer-reviewed journal, that process has happened in order for it to get published. And they usually have to send it back to you once or twice for editing. So you basically want to really focus on using those. Now, here's another good point. Inspiration for research can come from news or other popular sources, but the majority needs to be from scholarly sources, okay? So what you need to look at is how you can use all of those resources together. For example, if you're talking about social responsibility and the company that you're looking at is Nike and you'd like to talk about how socially irresponsible Nike is for their labor practices in Asia, you're probably going to find some sources that are not academic sources. But you also need to find sources that are academic, okay? And you can use them together. but you do not want to just rely on biased sources. Here's another really good one. A lot of students will use company websites. If I'm a company and I make a website about my company, it is not going to be objective. I'm going to paint my company in the very nicest light possible because I want people to go out there and buy my product or service. So I'm not going to say, oh, by the way, here's a list of YouTube videos that talk about how socially irresponsible we've been in the last 10 years. They're not going to do that. So you want to very, very minimally use those kinds of sources. You really, really want to focus again on these academic sources. Now, ProQuest and EBSCOhost and LexisNexis and all of them, all of these databases include non-academic sources, non-peer-reviewed sources. When you go to the library and you start looking through these databases and you do a search, there's a checkbox that you need to check, and it either says academic, scholarly, or peer-reviewed, one of those three, depending on the database. If you check that, the information that comes back, your hit list, like I call it, the list of hits that you get will all be academic. If you don't check that, you're going to get a lot of things that are not academic sources. So I'll get students that'll say, well, these are academic. I got them from the database in the library. Nope. That doesn't necessarily mean they're academic. It just means that you did not check the peer-reviewed option to make sure that they were all correct. Okay?
I have a question.
Yep.
If the website is an edu or an org, can we use those?
Okay, you can use them, but ORG websites are also not academic sites. They're just a nonprofit organization. But let me give you like an example. Redcross.org, okay? So redcross.org is a nonprofit organization, we know that. However, they're not going to be objective and unbiased because they still, I don't want to say they're still selling a product or service, but they kind of are. They're selling themselves on their website. They're using it as their marketing tool. So it's not going to be objective. The Red Cross website isn't going to tell you about research that's been conducted that, you know, they've been accused of some poor practices or, you know, that kind of a thing. So you can use them in conjunction. Now, if you're talking about Harvard Business Review, fine. Yep, scholarly source. So a lot of times students will come up with Harvard Business Review sources because Harvard obviously is a pretty decent source of education. So it kind of depends on how you're using the information. But if you come up with some kind of a research paper and it's on a .edu site, it's probably okay. I would be pretty leery of .orgs though.
Okay.
Again, it's kind of it depends kind of a thing. It depends on what the nonprofit organization is, but they're almost going to be like a .com because they still need to sell themselves on their website. Most of those websites are still marketing tools. Okay. And actually some of them, like another example, what's it called? PETA. When you get into your corporate social responsibility class, you'll probably see like PETA, the Ethical Treatment of Animals organization. They're not a non-biased organization. They pretty much hate everyone who they think mistreats animals. So they're not going to necessarily be a great source regarding objective information about animal treatment. So again, you just have to kind of gauge that in what context you're using them in. But you can do something like this where, let's say that you're talking about Tyson Foods, okay? Tyson Foods is well known for its very poor treatment of their chickens in their processing of, you know, from the time they're on the farm until they are packaged, okay? So they're inhumane treatment of chickens. PETA's probably going to have something to say about that. But you can talk about that as long as you also support it with something of substance, something that's credible with research behind it. And there are those case studies and things like that in the databases that will support that. So if you use them together, it's completely fine. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. You answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, so let's look at these different options for your reference listing. Okay, and the first thing we're going to look at is books. Now, you do have a textbook in many of your classes, and it is fine to use your textbook, but I'm just going to say that textbooks, although they are very good information, do not go through the peer review process that journal articles do. If I wanted to write a textbook tomorrow on leadership, I could do that. I could publish it and people could go out and look at it. No one would have ever had to review it. So I could write anything I wanted in there and basically publish it and have no real basis for what I'm saying. I'm not saying your textbooks are like that, but what I'm saying is books are not peer reviewed. So they don't count in terms of peer reviewed sources. Are they a good source of information? Absolutely. Are they a good place to start to find concepts and examples that you want to conduct more research on? Absolutely. That is the perfect way to use the book, is to find concepts and then go expand on them with journal articles. Okay? Now, in your reference listing, when you have a book, okay, you're going to put author's last name, comma, first name, period, the year, okay, and then a period, and then this is the important part right here, italics, not all uppercase. You'll notice that the title in all of these looks like a sentence, meaning the first letter of the first word is capitalized. There's only 4 times you would capitalize a word in a book title in a, right here. The first word after a colon, and proper nouns. The fourth one is if it's an acronym. So if you have a book title and there's an acronym like IT or something like that, that would also be capitalized. But otherwise, it's supposed to look just like a sentence. And then you have, after that, the city and state of publication, colon, publishing company. Okay? So it's going to be, 2 authors, kind of looks the same, except there's 2 authors at the beginning instead of 1. Okay? And again, you'll notice that all of it is lowercase except that first letter of the first word. Now here in this one, we have a colon. So you can see the T in the is capitalized. Okay? So basically, this is a pretty good site to be able to go to and go, okay, I have a book, it's got 1 author, what should this look like? Okay. Journals, which is what we really want you to be using, okay? So journals has 6 parts, actually has 7 parts, but sometimes the DOI is not available. This is my biggest issue right here. Do not put the URL from the library database in your source listing. Don't do that. If it's this permalink or this link to that article inside the EBSCOhost database, that does not go in your reference listing. Okay? Ever. There's never a time that happens. If it's a journal article, okay? Which you're going to mostly be using journal articles. So again, last name, first initial, year. Now here, the title looks a lot like a title to a book, except it's not italicized. Okay, so the title is, again, all lowercase except the first word after a colon, a proper noun, or an acronym, and ends in a period. The italicized part is the journal name and the volume number. So in this case, it's Nursing Standard, volume 17. And then inside the parentheses is the issue number. And then out here are the page numbers. If there is a DOI number, you need to use the DOI number. Here's an example of a DOI number. If that journal has a DOI number, that article has a DOI number, it needs to have that listed there. Okay? If you use a dissertation, and I really don't recommend that you do, this is the citation, this is how you list it. Now, dissertations are research. Obviously, we've all written one that have a doctorate. But I'm just going to say the first time that you conduct research, probably not your best research you've ever done. So this is everybody's first time they conduct research, is when they write their dissertation. So you're getting their first attempt at good research. So maybe not the best pool to pick from in terms of using outside sources. And there usually should be plenty of journals out there for you to choose. Now, this also gives you ideas on figures and tables and formatting and things like that. Let's talk about formatting for a second. I think this has what I want. Yes, okay. So here's your papers in terms of what's required for formatting, okay? 1-inch margins, double-spaced document, including the reference page, Times New Roman 12-point font, separate title page with the following information centered in the top half of the page: title, student name, course number, course name, school name, instructor name, and date submitted. So if I tell you you don't have enough information on that title page, that's all the stuff that you're going to need. So there's 6 things that you should probably have on that page altogether. Now, this says to insert running heads in the header of each page. If you're not sure about a header and footer, if you double click at the very top of a page, it'll bring up the header. Title of the paper is repeated at the beginning of the body, centered, major words capitalized, okay? Use proper headings. Indent all paragraphs 1/2 inch from the left margin. You can do that with a tab key. You only use last names in the citations. You do not use first names, ever. If you have a first name you don't want a first name in the reference listing either. You never use an author's first name. It's always just the initial in the reference listing and just the last name in the citation in the text, because using first names can lead to gender bias. And although the United States is pretty okay with different genders doing research, not every country is, and those databases have well more than just US-based research. So you never use first names. Okay, spell out all phrases when first used in the document with the acronym in parentheses after it. So just like this right here. The Chief Executive Officer, parentheses CEO. From then on, you can just use CEO. But that first time, you have to spell it out. Okay? You definitely need a page break for citations. You do not want your references to start on the same page as your conclusion is on. Okay? Your reference page needs to be its own page every time.
I have a question again.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
For our discussion boards, do you want it double spaced?
I don't care about the discussion boards for this kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, I know you said APA, and I wasn't sure if you wanted that double spaced.
You don't have to double space the discussion boards, and it's really difficult to get them formatted nicely in the discussions themselves. Even if you write it in Word and copy and paste it in, it just doesn't format nicely at all. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty forgiving on the discussion boards in terms of that kind of a thing. I'm completely fine as long as you're citing appropriately and using the references and having everything correct in the references in terms of capitalization, italics, that kind of thing. Spacing and things like that, I kind of am pretty lenient on in the discussions, because the Schoology is just not good with that kind of a thing. So plus it's nicer to have them actually single spaced, because then you don't have to scroll down so much in the discussion boards, because everybody's threads aren't twice as long. So I'm okay with single spacing in the discussions.
Okay.
Let's see what else. Okay. So specific writing recommendations, and you will probably see some of these in my responses and my comments in your documents. The first thing, a lot of times the writing process in graduate school is just different than the writing expectations that you've heard before. When we are in school, like K-12 school or even our bachelor's degree, we are taught a different form of writing. You're taught either literary writing, persuasive writing, opinion writing. You're taught, even my kids right now are in high school, and they're taught, be very wordy, be very descriptive, be very fluent and eloquent in how you write. Nope, that's not what we want anymore. That's not what we want at graduate level. If you can write and meet the minimum, you should be able to write every paper using the minimum page number required in the assignment. If you're going over the maximum page number, you are not writing clearly and concisely enough. So, what does this mean? Things like in order to, therefore, however, in my opinion, I feel that, I think, in my experience, all of that stuff, no, do not use it. It adds nothing to the content. It adds nothing to the meaning, okay? And, often when my kids are writing a paper, they'll say, based on this introduction, can you tell me what the paper is going to be about? Because they're not allowed to specifically state what the paper's about. Through their writing, you're supposed to just be able to know it. Well, that's literary writing. In your papers, you're supposed to briefly introduce the topic and then clearly state the purpose of this paper is to blank. Just lay it out there. Because that, you don't want the reader guessing at all. In graduate level research-based writing, you don't want them to have to guess at what your purpose is or what your point is, okay? You're just going to lay it out there for them, okay? You need to have an introduction, which I just talked about, and then your body, and a conclusion. Your conclusion should not introduce any new research. There should be no in-text citations in your conclusion. If you're introducing new research, you're not writing a conclusion, you're writing part of the body. Okay? So your conclusion should summarize the information and then draw conclusions based on the information and research presented. Okay? Be clear and concise. Again, do not use words and phrases that are filler. Do not use passive voice. Do not use redundancy, repetition. Make your sentences as clear and concise as possible, okay? If there's a number below 10, write it out as a word. If it's a number 10 or above, you can use the number. Never, ever use a number to start a sentence. So if you say 10 people stated, you can't use 10. You have to say TEN if it's at the beginning of a sentence, okay? 3 to 5 sentences per paragraph. If you have 2 sentences in your paragraph, I'm going to comment, you do not have enough substance here to develop the idea, okay? No contractions. Do not use contractions. Every word must be written out. Also, do not use pronouns, cliches, slang, jargon, bias, stereotypes, derogatory statements, inflammatory language, anything that incites emotion is bad in this kind of writing. So, I mean, I've had students who have swore in their papers. Probably not a great idea to do that. I mean, I'm not offended by it, but it's really not what we're looking for. Third person. A lot of students use I, my company, my this, my that. We will discuss this. We will discuss that. No. Third person. There are very, very, very few times you should ever use first person in your writing. Even if it is your company that you're talking about, you can still say the company or name the company. You don't have to say it's my company. You can just say this company, Nike, whatever. You don't have to say it's your company. Instead of saying, we will discuss this in the paper, we're actually not discussing anything. The paper's going to discuss it, but we're not. So do not use first or second person. No you, no me, my, our, none of that. Active voice rather than passive voice. Beware of tone as well. A lot of times people write very much like they speak, conversational tone. Your paper should not be written like you're having a conversation. So keep that in mind as well. This is a really good idea. Read and model your writing after professionals who are known for communicating well. When you're looking at journal articles, pay attention to how they're writing, because most of the time they're not using first person, they're not using contractions, they're not using emotion-filled words, they're not using things like hatred or this person was horrible or anything like that that's kind of emotion inciting. Feelings, no, keep the feelings out of it. It's very objective, research-based. That's a very different kind of writing than anyone is usually used to when they come into the graduate program. So just keep that in mind. This is a really important one. Read your work out loud. If you're reading it to yourself, the brain allows you to skip over things that you can't skip over if you hear them. If you're just seeing them on the page, you can read a lot of things and skip over things that aren't necessarily correct, but your brain will skip over them as you're reading silently. When you're reading them out loud, not only do you have to process them by looking at that, but you also hear it. And if you hear it, it often kind of triggers something that says that doesn't sound right. Okay? Have someone else read it out loud. They can often give you, if you have a spouse that you really want to, help you out, they can read your, proofread your work for you or read it out loud to you. That's definitely a good way to find some errors. And then also smart thinking. You can use smart thinking if you're not real confident in your own writing. Smart thinking is a great source. I think every student gets 600 pages a year reviewed or something like that. I don't remember, but it's a lot. So you could probably send just about every paper that you write in there and get some help on it. So just keep that in mind. But again, this is all available on the library. And so if you ever have questions about, guide to writing and APA, this is a great site. Honestly, there's not much that's anywhere else that's going to offer you that isn't right here for you to use. So if I were you, I would actually take this and bookmark it. It's actually in my bookmarks, so that you have it for when you're writing, and just have it up when you're writing so that you can go, wait a minute, I want to look at that example, or I want to check my in-text citation against what's here. Okay. It's a great website for students. And of course, if you ever have questions, you can always ask me as well. Another thing that I recommend to students is the software called Grammarly, and it's Grammarly. And you can just go to Grammarly.com. It's a free download, and it actually is available. I think it's free, but it integrates right into Microsoft Word, and it will find a whole bunch of things that Microsoft Word won't find, like passive voice and things like that, redundancy of words so that you should rephrase them, things like that. So just keep that in mind, that, that's another option. I do believe, again, that it's free. So it's Grammarly.com, I think, is the website.
I've used it before, and it's actually not free. You have to purchase
You
a
do?
subscription. Yeah, but I think it's like
Okay.
$25 a month.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Holy cow.
yeah, but
Okay.
it's good to use.
It might be worth it if you're having writing issues. If you're pretty good at writing, it may not be worth it. But if you're having some writing issues, it may be worth looking at. A couple times through the Smart Thinking site might also help you to kind of catch your own, start catching your own mistakes as well. But if you can get your paper done, before Sunday when it's due, and, maybe you get it done by Friday or something, or Saturday morning, they might be able to get it back to you in time for you to be able to make some changes before you turn it into the course room. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Because that 30 minutes just went to 53. Apparently I like to talk a lot. So does any of you have any questions at all, or?
Just real quick, when you're saying using all other sources as inspiration, does that mean is this something we can get our ideas from, but we can't use as fact or as a reference, correct?
You can, yeah, you can actually use them. You can use them as a source. But you should also be trying to support with other academic sources as well. You shouldn't have a paper where 8 out of 10 sources are not peer-reviewed. You really want the majority to be peer-reviewed. It is fine if you include other ones as well, but I would say over half need to be peer-reviewed sources. So you're probably going to find times where you need to use a corporate website, or where a book, or even something out of the course room is good, or even an interview with someone or something like that. But you do need to really, really focus on using those academic sources. That is something that's been a very big push at the graduate program level as of late, is to really focus on these different concepts of peer-reviewed research and scholarly writing and critical thinking and things like that.
Okay.
So if no one else has any questions, I'm going to actually stop the recording right here. Hang on.